Life is a winding road, no telling where it goes. Driving through days and nights, won't stop for traffic lights. And I really wanna know, really wanna know.
Well, good afternoon and happy Tuesday. Welcome to part 3 of our new year, new you, new way of thinking and being. I hope that you guys are having a wonderful week so far. Let's see. It's like late afternoon. Well, not late afternoon. It's like 1 here, but my brain is like starting to get foggy. I have not caffeinated enough, so hence my beautiful pink cup with the owls on it, and I'm having coffee. Anyways, so today I wanted to ask you, any of you who watched the video yesterday, did you take part in the thought experiment? How did that go for you? Did you enjoy any part of that, thinking that maybe life was happening for you instead of to you? Did it change the way your day went? Did it change the way today's going for you? Are you going to carry that forward, looking at life through a different lens, thinking that maybe we are not victims of happenstance, but that life is actually happening for us to learn and to grow instead of happening to us? Just a thought. Hence the thought experiment. I don't know. Maybe try it on for size, see if it fits. And today I'd like to talk a little bit about kind of another phase of healing things in our lives, which is some inner child work. We can't often move forward in life unless we deal with some of our past traumas. And the thing about doing work about past traumas is that we don't have to get stuck in our past stuff. You know, like over the years, I've done a lot of talk therapy with therapists, and often I've had to switch therapists because I have felt very stuck in this, like, rehashing, but not feeling like I'm moving forward. You know, like, okay, so I've talked about this thing, but then what? Right? Like, where do I go from here? If I keep talking about it, it's not making it better. I'm still reliving the trauma, and I don't know where to go from there. So I had a really great therapist at one point who made some really good points for me about healing, doing some inner child healing work, that I'd like to pass on a couple of tips that I got along the way and see if maybe they would help you. And they also, from a spiritual standpoint, I don't know any spiritual healers that don't talk about doing shadow work. And that's what shadow work is healing the inner child, healing those darker places within ourselves, those really, really wounded places. And so, it's a really intense read, but if you're interested in a book, there is a book called The Stories We Tell Ourselves. I can't pull the author's name out of my head right now, but you can just look up the title. But I will warn you ahead of time, it is a very intense read, emotionally intense. So if you are up for that, read it by all means. It is very healing. I had to read it in small doses. Maybe now I would be more prepared to read it, but at the time I wasn't prepared to read it except for in very, very small doses. But another thing that my therapist recommended for me to do was to write my younger self a letter. And I did do that. And I wrote the small me a letter of all the things I've learned along the way and how she was going to turn out. And that letter would look very different today than it did 20 years ago. But 20 years ago, I found it actually turned out very hopeful. And I was proud of the woman at the end of that letter that she had become, and that I learned that all the experiences I had been through had formed the woman that she had become. And even though that little girl had suffered a great deal of trauma, she grew into a compassionate, kind, loving, strong woman, and that she had survived all of those things that a lot of people wouldn't have survived. And so I encourage you to consider maybe writing your younger self a letter. And what you do with that ultimately is up to you. I ended up having a little bit of a ceremony where I built a fire and I burnt my letter and I sent it off into the universe. And I sent it kind of back in time to little me. And that was very symbolic. Some of you may decide to put it in a box and just keep it packed away so that you can refer to it when you're feeling really low and you need something to help you feel uplifted. Whatever works for you. Because remember, this is an independent journey. Like, there is no right or wrong way to heal. You know, you have to find what heals you in the way that uplifts you and makes you feel empowered. And there is no right or wrong in any of it. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, what were the stories that you told yourself when you were a child that got you through the hard times? Whether it was you were a child whose parents fought a lot, whether you were a child who suffered from DV, who were a child who suffered from SA, whether you were a neglected child, whether you were an adopted child, whatever it was that you went through in childhood, what was it that you told yourself? You know, because all children blame themselves in some way or another for whatever's going on in their environment. And so we write stories in our head and tell ourselves something to get us through that situation. So what story did you tell yourself as a child in order to survive that situation? And then ask yourself, does that story still serve me? Most of the time, 99% of the time, as you've grown up, that story, when you really look at it, it doesn't serve you. It served the child you. And so you can release that story. And I ask you to release that story with love, to look back, thank that child for protecting you, thank that child for writing that story to keep you safe and to protect you, and do that lovingly, and then let the story go and write a new story in your life. What do you want your life to look like now? You know, what is the new story of your life? And you get to create that because you're grown, because you are independent, because you're a whole, fully formed person. So we get to let those things from the past go. And that's part of the healing. And that's part of healing the inner child, is acknowledging that inner child, acknowledging its pain, acknowledging that it had to create those stories in order to survive, loving that inner child for protecting you, thanking that inner child, and then releasing that. And so that's a really important part of the work that we do in shadow work and healing our inner child. There's also numerous videos online about inner child healing. Lots of different ways that lots of different psychologists and psychiatrists do inner child healing. You may find something that's more of a fit for you. I come at it from a much more spiritual aspect, of course, because I'm not a professional, which is always my disclaimer, disclaimer, disclaimer. I come from a much more nuanced aspect as someone who has been doing the work for years, who has been in therapy, who's still doing the work. I'm always on this journey with you. I bring to the table the information that has been gathered from many different psychologists and therapists that I have worked with over the years personally, that have been friends of mine, and also spiritual healers that I've worked with. So this is information I give you, and also things that I have studied over the years on how to heal your inner child. So my approach is developed through experience, through study, and it's nuanced from just my perspective, but it doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make it the only way. You're going to have to find the way that feels right and resonates with your soul. And that's where I talk about always using your discernment and doing that gut check. What feels right to you? Because just because I say something doesn't make it correct, right? It just means that this is what's worked for me. So because it's worked for me, it may work for you, it may not work for you. So be open to maybe trying it. If it doesn't work, there are other resources. And I may list a few down in the description. And if I have not listed resources for inner child healing, by all means, drop me an email and I can list some more, or just do a YouTube search or a Google search on inner child healing. There are lots and lots of great resources out there for inner child healing. So the other thing I wanted to talk to you about today was I've been talking a lot about doing EMDR, which is a great trauma healing modality that actually rewires the brain. And I talked about that as the rapid eye movement modality. And I'm not going to go into depth about that today, but I am going to drop a link to a neuroscientist who does explain it in detail in the description, so that you get the basics on EMDR. And then I'm going to talk a little bit, probably tomorrow or the next day, about my journey with EMDR and kind of what happened in my journey and how much I benefited from using that modality in my own healing, especially after the accident, because I suffered from a lot of PTSD and survivor's guilt. And so I really cannot recommend it enough for anyone who suffers from CPTSD and PTSD as a modality to get through the really intense panic attacks, flashbacks, any of those things that are really plaguing you, lack of sleep, any of the things where you're severely triggered. For instance, after my accident, I couldn't hear a siren, and that's really problematic. I lived a few blocks away from a hospital. I couldn't see a white van really hard, like any church, any tour group uses white 15-passenger vans. So I had these triggers that were very unrealistic in the world that I live in. and they created like immense panic attacks to me and horrible, horrible flashbacks. And so I felt very dysfunctional in the world. And without EMDR, I'm not sure that I would be functioning at all the way that I do right now. And I'm very grateful for that modality. So I am going to drop that link down below so that you get a basis on why it's really good. And I do want to say this, that EMDR, in my opinion, is always best done with a professional that you have developed a really good relationship with, that you can talk through your trauma with, a trauma specialist. But I do really, really understand that, especially in the US, it's very hard to find a therapist who's trained in EMDR, and B, healthcare, mental health care is very, very difficult to get covered, and B, to have access to. And so I'm glad that there is a way to have EMDR accessible through YouTube, and that people are not limited in the same ways that I once was to having to have face-to-face meetings with an EMDR specialist. And so I'm glad that there is now EMDR training available on YouTube. But if you have the ability to find a specialist in EMDR, I highly recommend that way of doing it, because nothing beats being face-to-face with someone that you have built a relationship and a layer of trust with while you're going through the process, especially if you have a really, really deep trauma like I did. There's just nothing that quite beats that. But like I said, you do you, and any help is better than no help. And in retraining the neural pathways of your brain, look, anything is better than nothing. And I would say do the rapid eye movement however you can and retrain that brain, because you've got to be able to live, and you've got to be able to live in a way that is functional. So, use whatever modalities, whether it's the emotional freedom technique we talked about yesterday, it's tapping, EMDR, meditation, any other modality you can find that's going to help you get through panic attacks, through anxiety, help you, we're doing shadow work, talking about getting past some of the earlier traumas in your life, anything that's going to help you feel better. And just on a really deep personal note, as someone who has frontal lobe dementia, Donna and I were talking about it this morning, using all of these techniques and doing the things that I'm doing, I already am noticing a greater capacity in my brain to do research, to communicate with you guys, to do things that I wasn't able to do even 2 or 3 months ago. And I don't feel as mentally crippled up as I did. And so I feel like part of the things that Dr. Gabor Mate talks about are very, very true, that we can heal if we start doing the work to heal some of the traumas. And I'm very hopeful about that. And so just give it a try. We don't have anything to lose. I really believe that. And so I encourage you. And just remember, God, source, however we choose to look at it, only wants what's best for us. And I want what's best for all of us. So I love you all. I hope you guys have a beautiful, beautiful rest of the day. Know that you are deeply, deeply held in love and light. And I look forward to tomorrow's talk. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please watch the video all the way through to the end. And I will see you tomorrow. I love you. Go out and spread some kindness. Do something sweet for someone. Have a wonderful day.